to the PsyCoach podcast. Welcome to the PsyCoach podcast. My name is Nnenna Uneke. I am a psychotherapist and a life coach. I am also a student in organizational psychology. And the idea for this podcast is to combine the well-being practices that we know and some of what psychology teaches us about what it takes for us to thrive in our personal, professional, social, and spiritual life, and combine it together and create information on how we can actually apply psychology to us. I find that for people who grew up in societies where psychotherapy is not common, there's a stigma around therapy. When we hear therapy, we think something is wrong with someone, right? They're already maybe depressed, anxious, suicidal. There's something negative going on. And PsyCoaching for me is more about how do we thrive from where we are, right? We are here. We want to be better, go from A to B. What are the resources? What are the skills that we need to get to where we need to be? For me, that's where PsyCoaching come in. And I don't know about anyone else who has ever tried to go to therapy. The first time I went to therapy, I realized that there was a disconnect between my experience and what the therapist was trying to give me suggestions to do. So that lack of cultural awareness or competency was a barrier to my own healing. So in that moment, I started thinking, what if I can be the therapist, the culturally aware therapist that understands the cultural dynamic and also apply Western psychotherapy to healing, right? What would that look like? But the more I started practicing, the more I started thinking that sitting in a room, in a dark room on a couch, shrinking somebody or therapizing somebody is not enough. At least for me, it wasn't. I needed skills on how do I become a better person? How do I grow professionally? How do I improve my social currency? How do I strengthen my spiritual well-being? Because I realized that for us to really thrive, we needed to be growing personally, professionally, socially, and spiritually. And then I thought, how do I combine all of this into a modality that would be culturally appropriate and also integrative, whereby it integrates all these parts of healing that we need to move forward. And that's how PsyCoaching came in. And I'm excited to share this with everyone who is interested in growing, whether in your personal development journey or professional development journey, because there are a lot of resources that we could apply in everyday life to not only live, but to thrive in different areas of life. Like I said, psychotherapy focuses on the aftermath, right? It's a post-symptomatic intervention. So for someone to be eligible for psychotherapy, they would have undergone something. So when they're stepping into your office, you're diagnosing them. Right? You're giving them a label. Where in PsyCoaching, you don't need to be down with depression or anxiety. It could be, oh, I'm going for a promotion and I need some skills on interviewing, on understanding the people around me to improve my self-awareness, to make sure that I don't have remnants of past experiences from previous jobs or life experiences that I could bring to this workplace and jeopardize my chances of growing. Now, that might not be a diagnosable disease. That might not be something that fits the DSM, which is the diagnostic statistical module that we use to diagnose for mental illnesses. So in PsyCoaching, you don't have to have a mental illness or a mental disorder to come in for PsyCoaching, whereby for psychotherapy, there has to be a diagnostical illness to qualify for psychotherapy. That is the main difference. But I think on the other side of it is also the cultural part of it, where most of the psychotherapy modalities that we use aren't really modeled towards the African population. It's very Western industrialized, where a lot of it are on your individual emotional resilience, how you can thrive and do well all by yourself. And sometimes we exclude social connectedness and community, whereby in PsyCoaching, we recognize that social connectedness and community building is a big part of us as humans, and we need that to thrive. So part of healing or being on your healing journey in PsyCoaching will be to incorporate community, social connectedness support, even if that means you find a place weekly to go dance, connect with people, that is allowed. Where if I'm in my capacity as a therapist, I'm necessarily not prescribing for someone to go out and be social, right? We're talking something more clinical, more, what medication, what CBT and DBT and all these other clinical terms that we use in psychotherapy. Yes, because in PsyCoaching, we're not looking for what's wrong with you. How are you broken? We're looking for ways to support everyday life. Let's talk about having good mental hygiene. If I wake up every day and I know who I am and I'm self-aware and I know how to manage my anger, I know how to be around people so that I'm also not causing them stress, I'm easier to be around. So that means if I need something done, I can easily work with people to get it done. I'm not waiting until there's depression and anxiety to go to therapy. So that's what we call self-management. Going to therapy might not be an easy thing for people of the African population to do. Coaching might be an easier thing to do, but there is a little injection of psychology in the style of coaching. So it is more culturally appropriate for the African population. It doesn't have that much stigma attached to it. The PsyCoach podcast will be discussing ways that the people who have come before us explored their well-being without just taking or accepting whatever has been given to us or things we need to be healthy. How did they stay calm and healthy and well? Those are the conversations we're going to be having. We will be inviting people from all spheres of life to talk about how they maintain their emotional resilience and their emotional well-being, and also what level of emotional intelligence you have to be to function well in society. I think that this is an important conversation to have because it's important to look at how we stay emotionally grounded. I think we all can agree that there's a rise in stress, anxiety, depression, addiction, suicide. Is it that we are a weaker generation? Is there something in the water? Is there something going on that people can handle emotional stress? Maybe it's important to look at ways that the people who came before us have stayed emotionally grounded. It's also important to learn new ways to gain emotional intelligence, emotional resilience, so we can handle all the stresses in life without really going down the route of depression, anxiety, or substance use. And I think this is a good place to have conversations around that as it pertains to us. And we will be bringing experts in different fields to talk about their ideas of emotional well-being. What does that look like? And also, what do they do in their communities, in their companies, in their offices they hold to make sure that the people around them maintain good emotional well-being? So tune in every week while we explore these topics in the PsyCoach podcast. My vision for PsyCoaching is to have more and more therapists, licensed mental health therapists, who wish to become more culturally appropriate and who wish to apply a more Afrocentric lens in their treatment of people, and who also wish to work with people from outside of Western culture to get certified and trained to become PsyCoaches. I think it's important that we diversify our tool. We always talk about our toolkit in therapy. We have CBT and DBT and ketamine and all these types of modalities. And I think that PsyCoaching, the certification, is just one more tool to add that helps us understand the mindset of your typical non-Western client for psychotherapy or coaching. So my vision for PsyCoaching is to brand it in a way that people can get certified to become PsyCoaches in the future. I think because this is a new concept, a PsyCoach is an already trained mental health expert who wishes to combine coaching and psychotherapy. It's really that simple. Psychotherapy, coaching, PsyCoaching. And a licensed psychotherapist who isn't satisfied with the traditional talk therapy, sitting in the office with a client, talking about, so how does that make you feel? Someone who wants to look for real life practical solutions for their clients and figuring out what that looks like. So you can be a PsyCoach if you have this void and if you think that whatever tools you're using currently isn't enough and you want to gain more experience to help you serve a wider audience. So gaining that certification from the PsyCoaching Academy qualifies you to be a PsyCoach, but it's not just open to the public. You already have to have the clinical tools that would make it easy to combine coaching and psychotherapy for your client. And the way I've structured it, I have the personal aspect of it, the professional, the social, and the spiritual. Now, the last one I think is really important because in the clinical setting, I'm really limited in ways that I can use spirituality in clinical counseling. But the more I study, the more I realize that spirituality and spiritual resilience and growth is really important, and it's what takes us from regular, everyday people to people who are really growing and become more self-aware and becoming the authentic self. And I think that mental and spiritual growth is that last bit that pushes us from just regular people to real leaders in our field. So let's start with personal. If we don't feel okay within ourselves, and if we're carrying around trauma and anxiety and depression, then it's hard for us to go out and pursue what we need to do to become our professional best, right? So, and that's where the second dimension comes in. We would explore what resources and skills we need to grow professionally. And that dimension will focus on professional development, executive coaching, and individual coaching. Now, the third part of it is the social dimension, which focuses on our social life. What does it mean to be socially connected in our community? What do we feel like we have the ability to contribute to our community, to the society around us, to feel like we're living a meaningful life? What does it feel like to live a meaningful life? What does that look like for people? So we would explore that in the social dimension of it. And then the spiritual, which is the last part of it, I think that's important. And that is very personal for everybody. What does that look like? Because I feel like there's a general confusion out there with people around their spiritual identity, especially in Africa. People have this push to go back to the way things were. People are stronger in their identities as Christians. People want to explore traditional. People are Muslims. And there's a lot of confusions around what does it mean to be a spiritual person. And at least in the Nigerian or African context, there's a heavy overshadowing of religion. So when we think about spirituality, we only think religion. We think Christianity, Islam, and that's it. So I want to explore that. And of course, that's on an individual level. And what impacts does our spiritual life have on our emotional well-being? Because I think it's connected. In the clinical scale, we talk about emotional well-being. And that translates exactly to spiritual health. Because, for instance, I go into a place and I say, something doesn't agree with my spirit. That is your emotions. And what tells you that something is off? Your feelings, how you feel about a place. You could meet someone and have a bad feeling about it. And in your spiritualness, that is discernment. That's your intuition. But these are also terms that we can freely use in clinical psychotherapy. We can say, just trust your intuition, or if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Because in clinical psychotherapy, we emphasize cognitive practical logic, think about things. And sometimes things we can't explain, and that leaves room for exploring spirituality in that fourth dimension of PsyCoaching. Is the spiritual dimension about religion? No. We don't know her. We don't know what religion is. We're talking about the fundamental dimensions of well-being according to PsyCoaching. And I've identified that as a personal dimension, professional, social, and spiritual. This has nothing to do with religion. Now, let's talk about spirituality here more as a branch of neuroscience. And the reason I wanted to bring that up, when I talk about spirituality, I talk about the mind, right? Your inner you, your essence, who you are before somebody fed you what to believe in, right? Who to call God, right? Who to pray to. That inner need to connect to something that's greater than us. That's what I refer to. And we can trace it all the way back to neuroscience, right? When people do drug research, there's something called a placebo. So say, for instance, you gather 10 people and you're researching a medication, a new drug, and you give everybody this pill to take. You're going to pick out at least 2 people and give them just ordinary water pills. That medication has no medicinal value. It has nothing. It's just water. But these people believe that they're getting the medicine. And there've been a lot of drug research where they find out that those people who took the water pills actually ended up improving. And that's something that science hasn't been able to solve or figure out why. And the only thing they could explain is that it's their faith. They came in believing that this medication you're going to give them is going to cure their migraine, their heart disease, their cholesterol. They came in with their faith. And the only thing that made a difference between them and the people who didn't get better was the faith. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about belief. And that goes across belief in self, belief in ability, belief in the resources around you, belief that you have what it takes to succeed. That self-belief, that is the spirituality I'm talking about. So when it comes to science and neuroscience and belief and mind, that's really how powerful the mind can be if we detangle it from all the messaging about what it means to be spiritual, what it means to have faith, what it means to believe. Because I feel like sometimes the interface between religion and spirituality actually takes us further away from our spirituality. But that is a conversation to be had, and I'm open to having this conversation with people that will be coming to the show. But I just want to emphasize again that spirituality in this context is not religion and has nothing to do with religion. It's just coaching, but for executives, for leaders or leaders in training who are looking to level up their skills to succeed in leadership skills. Because believe it or not, a lot of the skills that leaders need to be impactful, transformational leaders are not technical. You could know how to send the best email, you could know how to code, but lack the people management skills to be a leader. So that process of leadership development for an individual is executive PsyCoaching. Again, it combines fundamental psychotherapy and coaching to create a program that will serve an individual who's hoping to grow as a leader and equip them with the skills they need to up-level to the next step in life professionally. So this would be the part of our professional dimension of PsyCoaching. PsyCoaching came about as a means of decolonizing mental health. Because like I said earlier, even when I step into someone's therapy room, it's hard for me sometimes to connect to all these theories that came from Freud, who existed 80-something years ago, or Erickson, or all these psychologists who never had any interaction with people like me or my ancestors. Of course, the modalities that they create are going to be tailored towards a Western industrialized position. What about me, who isn't a Western industrialized product? I needed psychotherapy to make sense for me. I needed psychotherapy to be explained to me through an African lens. And that's how PsyCoaching came about. I wanted people to look at well-being and emotional wellness as not something that is very foreign. We all need it. We all need to feel well in our minds, in our heart. We all need to be emotionally safe. And sometimes when we've been through trauma, we hold it the same as everybody else. But we also have to look at the trauma healing procedures in traditional psychotherapy and see, does that really work for us? Sometimes we might need to bring in people from our past, from our family, a line of origin to help us in that process of healing. And that's where PsyCoaching comes in, where traditional psychotherapy might talk about trauma. A typical Western person's trauma might be very different from an African person's trauma. So PsyCoaching allows us to tailor the healing practices to an African and look at the solutions with a very culturally appropriate lens. So I've been practicing psychotherapy for about 6 years now. But earlier on in my practice, I realized that talk therapy is not just enough, especially for my ideal client. I needed more. I needed to have more evidence that psychotherapy was going to work for someone like me. When I started working with people and applying a more holistic, a more integrative approach, which means we're not just focusing on that one thing, the depression. We're looking at the social factors. We're looking at how someone is succeeding professionally. We're looking at the spiritual death. I started to see more progress. When I worked in an agency, it was so easy to see someone who has been a client for 10 years. I don't know what kind of work you're doing with someone for 10 years that they would be a client and keep coming to the clinic. And of course, that's a business model. The longer you keep someone in therapy, the more money you get from insurance and pay. But I knew that I wanted to have a more solution-focused practice. I wanted more short-term based so that people can get the tools that they need and go on and be great. And that has been very successful. And how I did that was I recognized that there are 5 ways that we tend to feel stuck. One is the fear of success. Sometimes when people grow up in communal societies, standing out can feel like a burden. It can feel disruptive. So people want to blend in. People don't want to be too loud. So it's hard for us to self-promote and to highlight the things we do. So that fear might actually cause us to self-sabotage our own success. Next one is the fear of criticism. We don't want to make mistakes. Maybe we grew up in households where making a mistake was a bad thing. You got a spanking from your parents or you got yelled at. So people grow up not wanting to make mistakes. They become very self-conscious. So they always strive towards perfectionism. And if something is not perfect, they don't want to do it. So that holds us back. The next one is a scarcity mindset. We have this belief that there's not enough of anything to go around. I want to start a business, but no one's going to buy from me. Oh, there's not enough people who will think whatever I'm doing is valuable. We lock ourselves out before anybody even gets to count us out. So that's scarcity mindset. The next one is fear of the spotlight. We don't want to be seen. Maybe in primary 2, you had to recite a poem and you got on stage and you froze and people laughed. Every time you think about doing something that allows you to be on stage, you flash back to that time in primary 2 because that was a traumatic experience and you haven't really overcome it. So those are things that we explore. So that's 4. The last one being this fear of not being liked. We all want to be liked. And we have this fear of being excluded because we're social beings. So how can we overcome the fear of being liked and push through and do what we need to do? And then whoever wants to be part of our train will jump in and we can leave behind those who don't want to be. Because having this mentality of always being part of the crowd, always being liked, will hold us back from succeeding. That's how I categorize some of the setbacks that we experience that really hold us back from moving forward. And I find that once we address these key fears, then it's easier for us to start to move forward in life. So the reason I named my wellness center Integrative Wellbeing is, again, because I didn't want to focus on just the mental health, just on the pathology. Because, again, I find that Western talk therapy focuses so much on what is wrong with you. right? We want to look for ways we can help you succeed, be better. So that's why I say integrative, because we're integrating your personal, professional, social, and spiritual health to create that optimal well-being. And being an integrative PsyCoach means that I'm not only focusing on one side of it. We're looking at the whole person, at the holistic person, and looking for ways to help them succeed, be more. Of course, based on whatever struggles they might have and based on the goals that they want to achieve. We would love to hear from you. So please like, comment, share, and if you have any suggestions, feel free to drop it in the comment section and we will make sure to respond. Until then, always find ways to stay grounded in your personal, professional, social, and spiritual life. And also follow us. Our social media handle is The Integrated PsyCoach. See you next time.